I'm Claire Wade. I'm the author of The Choice. I won the East Anglian Book Award for Fiction 2020 and the Good Housekeeping First Novel competition. I'm also the co-founder of the Society of Authors Network for Disabled and Chronically Ill Authors. I have severe ME. It has impacted my life in all areas and has definitely played a part in my journey through the publishing process. It's been something that felt quite lonely and isolating, and I didn't know where to go to for advice and support. So I contacted the SOA and there wasn't anything set up, but along with my co-founder Patrick Walsh, we got a group together, and it's been running for the past 8 months, and it's just the loveliest place to be. Everybody's really supportive. There's lots of encouragement. If anyone's got any questions or problems that they're dealing with, they bring them to the group, and we normally kind of brainstorm all the things that we've been through to help each other. So if anybody is interested in that, we would love you to join us. It's free and open to members of the Society of Authors, and we're going to put up the link in the chat. So one of the things that the group wanted to know about was more on how to apply for an agent, how to get an agent, what the agent's role is once you actually acquire one, and specifically how that would be impacted for people with chronic illnesses and disabilities. That maybe means that they have to work in a slightly different way. So we talked to the Society of Authors, and they've put this event on, which is very kind of them. So here to answer your questions is Charlotte Seymour. Charlotte is Secretary of the Association of Authors Agents and an agent at Andrew Nernberg Associates, where she represents a variety of fiction and non-fiction, including crime and thriller, literary fiction, popular science and cookery. She also handles English language rights for international authors from countries ranging from Italy to Korea. Charlotte, would you like to tell us a bit more about your role as an agent?
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to the SOA for having me. And it's amazing to see so many people here. So as Claire said, I wear 2 different hats, and I'm going to mainly focus today on the role of a literary agent. But I thought I would just briefly explain a bit more about the other hat, which is my role as secretary for the AAA. So the Association of Authors Agents is our trade association. It's a voluntary association for British-based literary agencies, and we are a committee of 7 supporting over 100 member agencies. So throughout the year, we put on meetings, panel events, seminars, you know, in many ways as the SOA does for its members. And we're really working to provide a forum for agents and agencies to discuss industry matters, to promote best practice among agents, and finally to offer a collective voice in lobbying government to protect authors' interests. But yes, most of the time in my day job, I'm obviously hard at work as an agent. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a presentation, if I can work out how to do that. Here we go. Share. Is that all working, Claire?
Yes, that's brilliant.
Great. So yes, I want to focus you know, not just on what an agent is and how to get one, but also, you know, what happens if you do secure representation, because I think there's a lot of focus on the submission process and maybe less known about the process of working with an agent once you are signed up. You're going to see a bit of Eloise and some other silly cartoons because I had to make PowerPoint fun in some way. So the role of an agent is enormously varied. And as you can see from my list here, we act as readers. Many of us act as early editors for our authors before submitting their work. We are our authors' greatest champions, both within our companies and then to the publishers with whom we're hoping to place their work. We like to think of ourselves as matchmakers. And what we're really hoping to do is match an author up with the editor and the wider publishing house that is going to be best suited to publishing their work, ideally not just for one book, but for their whole career if possible. We, of course, like to get down and negotiate hard when we do have offers in from publishers. And then, beyond any given book, we're acting, in the longer term as mentors to our authors and kind of strategizing, thinking about their career in the long term and what direction it might take. So quite a lot of different things to juggle, but that is why it is so fun and interesting. Now, you certainly don't have to have an agent in order to get published. It's often the case with the smaller publishing houses that they sign up authors directly, and many of the bigger houses have open submissions windows at given periods throughout the year for authors who don't have representation. Even then, often if a publishing house is interested in an author, they will recommend that they find an agent. So I thought I'd run through what I think are some of the advantages in having representation if you can secure it. Agents ought to know the market in the given genres that they represent, and so they should be able to advise how broad a readership your work may have, and help you, if necessary, sort of refocus or reframe your work in order to broaden out that readership as much as possible. We spend a lot of our time building close relationships with editors where our tastes and interests overlap, and a lot of business does, come down in the end to these kind of personal shared passions, which are really important and wonderful. I've mentioned negotiating, and I think it's quite hard without an agent to decipher the ins and outs of a publishing contract, and an agent will know, how to negotiate not just the key terms of a publishing deal, the advance and the royalties, but all of the small print, which does still, have further impact on your income, and which is really important. And then, some people do it all themselves. I'm very lucky that we have a contracts manager and an accounts department who support us with all the administrative side of things. Agents, I think I can hear someone's hoover. Agents will be thinking not just about a book's life in the UK, but also in the US or other English language territories, for translation into other languages, adaptation on film or TV, and audio, podcast, a whole host of other platforms and media which are emerging. So I think, again, while without an agent, it's certainly possible to find a publication deal, it might be more challenging to find ways to exploit your work in all those other ways. I think one of the most important things is that having an agent to offer these services for you gives you as an author that crucial time to focus on your writing and your craft. And should you ever run into trouble with your publisher, things don't always run completely smoothly, your agent is there as your champion and can effectively play bad cop and allow you to maintain the good relationship with your editor. It doesn't happen too often, but that is what we're there for when needed. And finally, as I've said before, a good agent is thinking not just about the one book that they sign you up for, but hopefully a long and fruitful career of many books. I don't want to spend too long on the submissions process because that is effectively a whole presentation in itself. But a few tips and recommendations from me. I think it's important to consider what kind of agent you want, because they do vary enormously. Some agents, myself included, like to work very closely editorially with their authors before sending the work out to publishers. I think if you are a debut in particular, that, you know, is really invaluable. Other agents aren't so editorially focused, you know, but are really strong marketers, pitchers, salespeople. Likewise, you know, there are very established agents with enormous lists and very impressive lists who one might approach, or you might take the view that it's better to go for someone slightly newer to the industry with a smaller list who might actually have more time to dedicate to you. So I think thinking about those things and then taking the time to really research different agencies and the tastes of individual agents will stand you in really good stead. I'm going to sort of skip through the rest of this slide. I'll leave it here for a second so you have a chance to read, but I think, you know, a lot of it goes without saying that, like applying for a job, it's about making really targeted, well-researched approaches rather than a sort of blanket application. And if you can show that you've taken the time to do that, agents will be much more likely and inclined to engage with your work. Managing expectations is one of the biggest part of an agent's role. And so I think it's, you know, also important to think about these things as you head into this process, and, you know, and sort of think about what your expectations as well as your hopes are. It is, you know, it's a very collaborative process, which inevitably involves a certain amount of rejection, constructive criticism. So I think, you know, thinking through whether you're open to that. If you're not, it's going to be quite difficult. Are you up for working closely with an agent and then hopefully an editor to revise your work? The end result realistic? This is a wildly unpredictable industry, and the most amazing things do happen, but even the most experienced agents can never quite predict how it's going to go. So I think just taking the time to think about those things is really helpful. And these are the sorts of questions I do ask people when I'm signing them up, because I do need to know that they are up for these things, basically. So the requirements on a published author vary, but it's certainly worth knowing, you know, what a publisher might be asking of you in terms of social media, publicity, and events, and, you know, in the context of, you know, disability, chronic illness, but really any other requirements, because every individual has their own requirements. I think just being aware of what your needs are and making those clear to your agent and later to your editor means that, you know, everyone can work to accommodate you. So, you know, everyone is different, and it's just about, in my view, being really open about it, because the same is true of agents. We all have, you know, different demands on our time, and many of us are chronically stressed and anxious and exhausted, you know, so it goes both ways, and it really is about having an open conversation about your needs and your expectations. So again, on expectations, you know, querying agents can take a long time. I have sat on a manuscript for a year and then signed the author up. So we don't always manage to get back to people in the sort of, you know, 6, 8 weeks, 3 months that we say, you know, and many people encounter widespread rejection and then go on to win prizes. So I would just say, be patient and persevere, because agents also experience that, you know, when they are submitting work to editors, it's a long game, but that's another reason why the results can eventually be so rewarding. I'm not sure if this incarnation of Eloise is meant to be the author or the agent, but I think it could be both, because we're all in it together. finally, I just wanted to give 3 examples of books from my list, which show the different ways that I find authors, about the sort of process that we went through in the lead up to publication. And I think all 3 of these just show how we're very used to working with people on an individual basis and bearing in mind, you know, what other things they may be balancing in their lives alongside their writing, and how best to make that work for them. So The Sanatorium is a debut thriller, which is coming out with Transworld in February. Sarah Pearce, the author, submitted a previous manuscript unsolicited to me, which I took her on for, and we had brilliant feedback from editors, but ultimately didn't sell. It fell slightly between genres. Her next manuscript, however, was preempted in a 6-figure 2-book deal, and we've now sold it in 10 languages and have really strong film interest. So I think that just goes to show that, you know, it's not always a straightforward path, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work out, and a good agent will, you know, be up for that journey with you. Sarah is now due to deliver her 2nd book, and I think, like everyone, has had quite a challenging year. She, you know, does not have any chronic illness or anything like that, but, you know, does have various family commitments and reasons that have made delivering to the original deadline difficult. And so, because she was able to communicate with me about that, I then negotiated an extension with her editor, and that, you know, is something we are used to doing quite frequently, because, you know, life does throw up difficulties, and, you know, this year particularly, everyone is quite understanding about that. The Insomnia Diaries. This is the extraordinary story of Miranda Levy, who suffered for 8 years with chronic insomnia and lost her marriage, her career, and, you know, really just any semblance of a normal day-to-day life. She came to me recommended by an existing client. We worked on her proposal, and just when I was starting to give up hope, because we'd had widespread declines, a really passionate editor fell for it, and we ended up securing quite a nice deal. So again, not always straightforward or predictable. That doesn't mean it's not going to work out. Now, the delivery date of Miranda's manuscript and the publicity to which she's committing are all subject, of course, to her well-being. And so that was part of our conversation with the publisher from the outset. And, you know, there is even wording in her contract to account for that, rather than saying the author will do this. It is all, you know, subject to best efforts in terms of interviews that she can do, publicity, and so on. I think we're, of course, helped in this year by, you know, increased use of things like Zoom, which, of course, you know, just make everything more accessible. So I do think that's been a good development from all of the horror that we've seen this year. Finally, Rising Hope is a cookbook by Luminary Bakery, who are a social enterprise with 2 cafes, and they support and train women who've experienced disadvantage in a variety of ways, from homelessness to domestic abuse and so on. I approached them thinking that there was real potential in a story-led cookbook about overcoming adversity. So we sold that on proposal, but again, we were working with multiple contributors with all kinds of complex needs. And so from the outset, we were having conversations about how to protect the privacy of certain individuals, which was one reason it ended up being an illustrated cookbook rather than photographic. And then, you know, the publicity strategy. There were some people who are up for doing interviews, others who are not. We had to put quite strict parameters on what those discussions would be, and think ahead about how to kind of navigate any issues that did come up on social media. because this has happened in the past. So I hope that this and the previous examples show that we are used to working with people based on their varying individual needs, and whether that's a chronic illness or disability, or you are a carer, or simply juggling a busy day job with your writing career, we bear that in mind, and do our best to accommodate. But I'm really interested to hear how we can do better. So shall we move on to questions?
That would be brilliant. It was really interesting. It was lovely to kind of hear your different experiences and with the different authors. So do you have any experience working with, other than the lady with chronic insomnia, have you got any other authors that have disabilities or chronic illnesses, and how does it work?
Yes, off the top of my head, we have authors with Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, bipolar disorder, and a host of other mental health issues. And, again, as with the authors who are juggling, a busy day job with their writing, or the authors who have busy families, we treat everyone in the same way, which is that, we are there to work with them in the way that best suits them, and to make sure that their publishers do the same. Yeah.
I mean, speaking from a personal experience, sometimes there's this fear of being seen less than the well authors, the abled authors, and I think there's kind of a stigma to actually approaching an agent and talking about your disability or your chronic. I mean, how does that translate if someone gets in touch? And I was very upfront when I was querying. I mean, my agent came through a competition, so it didn't come that way, but I was mentioning it. But is that a barrier? Would you like people to mention it in their letter when they get in touch the first time? Is that...
Ultimately, we're all looking for good writing, stories that draw us in and transport us. So if your background and experience is an important part of your story, I would certainly mention it from the outset. Also, because if someone approached me writing about disability, I would want to know either that they had personal or close experience, or that they had done their research. I don't think that you need to mention it, otherwise in your first approach to an agent. Really what they're looking for is the quality of work. But from the moment you do have interest from an agent, it's really invaluable if you can be open and clear about your needs, basically.
And how is the best way for us to be able to do that? How are there information that you would need? Is there anything specific that you would want us to tell you? How much do you want us to tell you?
I think encouraging that openness. There's a huge and increasing focus on promoting underrepresented voices, and because of this year's events, a lot of that focus has been on Black and BAME authors, but the same goes for people with disability, people who are working class, people have kind of various neurodiversities. So the industry really is working hard to try and put out the message that it is open. So I think if you as a network can make that known, and I will, in my secretarial hat, I will report back on all of this to the entire AAA membership. So that's 100+ agencies who will know about this.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So does your agency have a disability policy, and is that something that you recommend that other agencies have?
I haven't looked at a written policy. I'm sure that our policy towards authors would be the same as towards staff, which all comes under the Equalities Act, and there's a requirement that you be open to all. So we we do think hard about these things. We don't expect that people are based in or able to come to London. I frequently travel to outside of London to meet with my authors. You know, I would, you know, and if that's not possible, then of course we have the phone, we have Zoom. Yes, so it's very important to us that we, you know, we're there to make things work.
Fantastic. Thank you. So do you have an opinion on disabled or chronically ill characters in fiction? Is that something that you're finding that publishers are looking for now? Are they more open to it? Is it a barrier to a story getting published?
I don't think it's a barrier, but I'm sure there aren't enough of these stories being published yet. I think we see a lot more kind of issue-driven fiction on the YA side, and the adult side of fiction is slowly catching up. But I think, you know, as I said before, agents, editors, and crucially readers are looking for stories that draw them in, that transport them, and hopefully teach them something new about the world, you know. So if you can do that, there's no reason why you shouldn't succeed.
And is there anything more that we as the Authors with Disabilities and Chronic Illnesses group could do to raise awareness, to to have more of a platform and to have our voices heard better?
That's a really good question. And I will talk to my committee about that to see, you know, whether there's more that we can do with the Society of Authors. But no, I think just sharing that message that, you know, our perception is not that there is any stigma or taboo. We really want to hear from people.
Fantastic, thank you. So what is viewed as not commercial? We've had some of our members who've written books and who have been told how good their writing is, but that they're not commercial enough. How do you know where you are on the scale, and is there anything you can do to tip it in your favour?
What people consider commercial or literary is, I think, very subjective. And I mean, when I find people giving feedback on things that I've sent to them and saying not commercial enough, or you realise that people have a very different perspective on that spectrum. I think broadly what would qualify as commercial is where, you know, as well as good writing, you know, the book is underpinned by a really strong plot and probably, you know, a relative pace to the narrative, and, you know, that kind of book is going to have a relatively broad readership. What, in my opinion, counts as more literary is where the style is as important, possibly more important, to plot and pacing. You know, and that may have a smaller readership, or it could be that the subject matter of the book is somewhat more sort of niche or specialist, and again, you know, can lend itself to a slightly smaller readership. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to distinguish, but it's very hard to say.
Yeah, it sounds like it comes down to personal choice, which is challenging. So if somebody's writing for a smaller niche market, how do they find an agent that specialises in their niche? Is that something that they're anywhere that they can look that up, or how does that work?
If you are, so I remember this question did refer specifically to rock and roll music. Yeah. If you're writing non-fiction on a very specific subject, or, you know, on music, say, it is more common that you can go directly to a publisher. I mean, particularly if you're at the more academic end of the market, but lots of more specialist books, those authors will be working directly with publishers rather than through agents. The other thing to do, I would say, is just look at other books in this area, look at the acknowledgements, or go online and see who represents those authors, and start by approaching those agents.
And we've had one member who's getting very good feedback on their manuscripts, but they're never getting to the stage of getting a deal. How can they work out what they're doing wrong, what they need to change to be able to get to the paid author stage? Is there anything that you can recommend?
I think again, remembering that this question related specifically to, I think, kind of action and war dramas, and genres like that can work particularly well with digital publishers, who again are much more used to working directly with authors than necessarily via agents. And so I think, if there's recognition that the work has merit, but publishers don't quite seem to be able to justify paying in advance, digital publishing for commercial fiction in particular can be a really good route, because you don't receive an advance up front, but you receive a much higher royalty much sooner, because there isn't an advance to be recouped. And for the right genres, those books can sell really, really well.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions that we've got. So now I've seen that there's some coming in through the chat, so we will see what people have to say. Go. Okay, so Ian Coates, while seeking an agent, is it best to avoid contacting small publishers at the same time?
No, I don't think so, in the sense that it is a very competitive world, and in a way you're widening your chances. But if you were then to receive interest or an offer to publish from a smaller publisher, it would still be worth at that point either asking the publisher if they can recommend an agent, or seeing if you can secure representation at that point nonetheless.
Lovely. We've got someone who's writing a novel with deaf characters, and they studied BSL for many years. Will their agent be able to stipulate that they want a sensitivity reader as part of their editing process?
That's a very good question. We have never done this before. It's much more common in the US than here. And so it probably, we probably are going to see more and more of it, as is the case in nonfiction, where many books get libel reads. But I think this is normally something that the publisher would undertake rather than the agent. But as I've said, I think there are more agents doing that in the States than there are here at the moment.
So from D, in the year while you were considering the manuscript, did the writer contact you to prompt you at all, and would you have expected that?
She did. She was very gentle about it, and I had read enough and gotten other reads from colleagues to know that I was interested. And it really is about sometimes just being in the right headspace, which this year in particular has been really, really difficult. But she was in touch from time to time, which I fully expect and appreciate. And we ended up working together and getting her a 2-book deal. So it was a happy result despite my slowness.
Lovely. So, I mean, I know it's hard to say like as an average, but how long would you recommend somebody waits before they follow up?
Probably worth, so yeah, agencies will indicate, whether or not you're likely to hear back from them. Some agents probably, if they have an assistant, or, they are able to send some kind of response to every submission that they receive with a yes or a no. We unfortunately don't manage that at the moment, though we would like to get better. So I think if you feel really strongly that this agent is the right agent for you, it's worth sending a polite follow-up, say a couple of months after. Yeah, it's hard to say, but again, based on what they say, their kind of policy is on getting back to people and how long it might take. That's probably will give you the best steer.
From Jacqueline Mitchell, if you're writing in more than one genre, fiction and non-fiction, how do you manage that with agents? Do you have different ones? Do you have one that represents both of your interests?
I would say the ideal is definitely to look for an agent who would handle both. Yes, it's quite hard to kind of launch a career with both simultaneously. So again, you know, that's a conversation to have with your agent about where to start, and how to work that out. But yes, I mean, a lot of agents do represent quite a wide variety of genres and styles. And sometimes you have authors who write both for adults and for children, and there are quite a few agents who represent both. So.
Vicky Argyle asked, in terms of publicity, things like attending literary events, radio and Zoom, how much would the publisher precipitate it, or is it up to the author, or is it a mix of both?
So you will have a publicist assigned to you in a publishing house. That can obviously vary based on the size of the publisher. Sometimes, you know, your publisher might be one or two people who are effectively doing everything, although they will then often outsource things like publicity to freelancers. But you should have someone who is actively pitching your work for coverage in the media and for review. But publishers really like to work collaboratively with authors on this. So where authors do have contacts, or, you know, and are able to do as much as they can on their own social media, that is also brilliant.
And Trudy Lewis wondered if you could name some of the digital publishers that you were suggesting people get in touch with.
Yes, I'm hesitant, just more not. I'm very happy to recommend publishers. It's more I'm very likely to forget someone notable, but if you promise not to tell them. So within Hachette, there's a digital imprint called Bookouture. There's a digital house called Canelo. Head of Zeus have a digital arm. HarperCollins have several digital imprints. Many of these it's one or two editors in the bigger houses, you know, within a bigger imprint such as HarperFiction or HQ, who are looking for authors to publish primarily digitally. But most of these publishers will also produce a paperback, at least for the books that sell particularly well. So if you are particularly tied to the idea of having a physical book, and I can understand why, you know, that remains an option with many of these publishers.
Yeah. And I think probably for our last question, Michael Banks wanted to know, would an agent still be interested in representing an author if they had already been published by a publisher and without an agent? Would this stand in your favour or not?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. You know, having publications to your name, whether it's short stories in magazines or published works, all help, but they're not a prerequisite. You know, then there's the question of how did that book perform? But I think that's another thing that agents can be quite good at is sort of reinvention if necessary. Sometimes one's career doesn't go quite in the trajectory that you're hoping, and an agent should be able to help you think through how you might, kind of relaunch yourself, sometimes under a different name, or, you know, there are all kinds of options.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. This has been fascinating. I've learned lots, and I've already got an agent, so it's been really helpful. And hopefully everybody on the call has taken away some useful information, and they will be able to go away and query some agents, and we can get some more books out there, because I think the world needs more books. So Charlotte, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. One thing I would love is if anyone wants to recommend books, you know, that do have these positive representations, because I certainly haven't read enough. One of my favourite books in recent years was a memoir called Girl in the Dark by Anna Lindsay, which Bloom's republished. This woman who developed a severe sensitivity to light and basically couldn't go outside for a very long period, had to live in a darkened room. It was quite extreme. But I would love some recommendations, which I can then share with my colleagues, both in the agency and the AAA, and that might help us think a bit more about these things.
Brilliant. Well, lovely. So thank you ever so much. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.